Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Fault Line podcast. And we've got a good one for you today. Kim and I spent some time digging into making the next best decision. Kim, any tips or hints for our listeners before we dive into the full episode?
Yeah, I think this is a great episode because it hits all levels in an organization. So, whether you're a leader or a team member or leading a new product development, there's something for you in this episode on making the smallest decision that can keep you moving towards your goal.
Yeah, just want to reinforce that. And for me, the joy of this is what we discuss applies to individuals in their personal lives. It applies to us as individual contributors, and it helps teams, particularly as they're negotiating complex or long range projects. So without further ado, here's the next best decision from the two of us on the fault line. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of The Fault Line, the podcast where Kim Scribner and I explore all the realities of aspirations meeting the real world and trying to do the best you can with the choices and resources that you have. We've got a good topic today. Kim, do you want to cue it up and then we'll dive right in?
Yeah. So Gary and I had been talking about decision making and what your next best decision is. And we're going to kind of dissect those three words individually and talk about how you can make responsible choices in small increments.
Yeah, and for me, the joy of this topic is it touches on some pragmatic approaches for helping teams achieve their aspirations. And it also touches on individual behavior and our psychology, the monsters we envision in front of ourselves versus the reality that we have to face. So it feels like a topic that's both useful and valuable.
Yeah. So, Gary, you were, as we were prepping for this conversation, talking about how you've used this technique or you've coached both personal family members as well as professionals in this. Why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of some of those scenarios?
Sure. I'll start with the professional side of things. And a lot of this goes back to new product development days. Um, frequently, I'm thinking of a particular organization in consumer packaged goods. We would drive towards an actionable insight. Let's understand the problem we can solve for the people who use our brands and our products. And then we'd go off and sit down with super smart people, chemists and packaging engineers and operations people, and figure out, like, okay, how are we going to attune the solution for this? And the reality was frequently we'd have an insight and it might take us years before we had delivered something that actually addressed it.
Yeah.
And I've also worked in consumer durables and, places that bend metal and things like that. And I'll give an example maybe that's tangible. At one point, a number of years ago, gas prices spiked. Hey, we've been dealing with that again here in 2026. And in some places around the country, they were, over $5 a gallon. And a bunch of product managers went out and were doing user research on engines at that time and decided fuel efficiency was a primary criteria for a new product that was going to take 3 to 4 years to bring to market. And if they had stayed only focused on that, their one long bomb strategy would have missed the mark. They would have attuned everything for that insight at one moment in time, but consumer needs had shifted because, lo and behold, the gas price spike turned out to be short term. Things came back down to what was then normal. And the alternative is an iterative approach and to chunk up the choices into, well, what's the thing that moves us forward versus how do we solve it all right now? And I'll pause there because there's probably a fair amount, and then we can come back to the sort of
Yeah.
psychological stuff later.
I mean, I'm thinking about just our careers in what you're talking about, because for most of my career, we have practiced, or I have practiced some type of iterative development, right? I've worked with software engineers building new platforms for more than 20 years. And so almost the entirety of my career has been iterative in some way. And it's almost like it's the only way that I know how to work. And so sometimes and also having worked in software development is much different than when you're building an actual tangible product, very different concepts. But we were always able to learn what our customers actually wanted because we were doing software releases daily in some cases or multiple times in a day. And so it was those small choices that we were making and getting immediate feedback on that made those the best choices. And it's a little bit almost hard for me to wrap my head around like an 18-month or 24-month project. It's almost a
Yeah,
foreign thing.
yeah, yeah. And there's the automotive industry is full of initiatives that take years, right? Building a new platform, et cetera. And, I've worked at an organization where just building the tooling took close to a year for us to produce products. And those are high stakes decisions. And the the thing, and you touched on it in your comments just now, the thing that to me has always been helpful is that continual feedback loop. Even when it feels like something is plain as day, validating that it still holds, making adjustments, creating the steps along the path, and sort of recalibrating the navigation choices of where we're going. Because, as I mentioned in the engine example, uh, preferences can shift, market conditions can shift. And when there's a high frequency of launches, software updates, tweaks, things like that, that feedback loop is pretty tight. But if it's going to take 6 months between key decisions in an initiative, sometimes, or a year between key decisions in an initiative, it's worth going back and validating and having the ability to affirm, yes, we're still along on the right path, or to be able to make an adjustment to accommodate where the market really is.
Yeah.
Um,
I was working last year with a consumer packaged goods company, and they were um, putting together a product that would control humidity in your refrigerator. So think how many bags of spring mix we've all thrown away,
yes.
which, like, side thing, I recently said, why does spring mix go bad so quickly? And apparently it's because it's all baby lettuce, which is much more, will get ruined like faster when it gets a little tear in it, in case anybody needed to know that. But they built a product that would allow for humidity to be controlled even in your refrigerator so that you're throwing away less spring mix. But they did similar to what you're talking about. They made a decision not about the outside of the packaging first, but what did it need to do in order to accomplish those results, right? That was the most important thing. And it didn't matter what it was called or anything yet, as long as it worked. And so when I hear you talking about those different stages, right, that was a recent example in my experience where they actually did create the functioning product that looked pretty ugly and didn't have a great brand name, but they sent it to their employees to use to make sure that the product would work first.
Yeah. And, that's a terrific example of having an aspiration. Hey, we're going to have a finished good. We're going to, have a compelling brand. We're going to have good packaging. It'll do well sitting on a retail shelf and function. So then not trying to solve all of that in one fell swoop, but saying, okay, so from where we are now, this is the title of the episode. What's the next best decision? What is a no regrets step towards our aspiration? And being able to de-risk that choice of what to do next, because you can do something next. And again, just carrying your example through, we've prototyped, we know it's ugly. We're going to
Mhm.
go to a safe haven, our employees. They're going to give us feedback that helps us then make the next best choice. And I think, this for me provides a lot of those calibration moments. And it also defers taking a decision prematurely that could turn out to be a high risk choice until more things have been learned.
Yeah.
And
In that example, they actually learned they were going to put it out in cardboard packaging and learned that, well, that's going to get soggy in your refrigerator, so it wouldn't work. And so they had to change it. So if they wouldn't have
there you go.
taken those steps, they wouldn't have learned those things.
Yeah. And, that to me, especially with, again, high stakes things. Sometimes people are investing millions of dollars or thousands of human hours into these initiatives. Being able to get in a cadence of these are the things we're going to do. And then we're going to say, how much of it did we do? What did we learn? So now what are the next things we're going to do? That that iteration, those lily pads that allow for the hops forward, actually frequently result in better on target market launch and commercialization. And that's for me the sort of pragmatic. Hey, let's think about how we do this. It goes right back to agile practices and stage and gate reviews. There's a bunch of methodologies out there that all embrace this thing. I think there's also an aspect still in this space of when we know all of the variables and the conditions, it may be a complicated set of steps to move forward. Frequently, we don't. And there's this sort of complex circumstance with unknowns. And again, this idea of breaking things down allows us to experiment, to actually thump the situation or the environment so that it resonates and reverberates, and we can observe then what has happened and learn.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
that's
part of if you're not watching, I'm smirking and smiling at what Gary's saying because in season 1, we spoke with a guest who we were talking about why even when given data do people not make choices, and kind of the
right.
fear aspect that you're talking about is, well, if I make too big of a choice, what could go wrong? When you make your choices smaller, there's less risk.
Yeah. And every step forward and every one of those learning moments starts to hone in and build confidence. And it makes the ultimate choice of, hey, we're going to invest in capital for tooling, or we're going to re-platform our software, feel less threatening and builds confidence in the team. And it's a skill. It's a muscle memory thing that can be pervasive in an organization where there's permission to do these smaller things. Um, and it also, for me, one of my sound bites with my teams was always, let's scale to fail. Let's understand that an experiment, if it fails, can actually be instructive, not destructive. We've learned from it, so the next best decision is actually more informed.
Yeah. I think that's the epidemic maybe in businesses is if you're not learning from your failures,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so, we're talking about making the next best decision. There's also a kind of a side piece or a wraparound of that, which is having leaders that allow those decisions to be made without, you know, ramifications if it doesn't go perfectly the first time.
Yeah, and again, that's where this scale to fail mentality says, listen, we're not going all in with all our chips. We're placing some small bets that help us build confidence that we can place a larger bet. And the tension there, and I think many of the people who listen to our podcast can relate to this, is they're always being told, go faster, go faster. And you can go faster, but sometimes faster brings with it significant risk, right? Because if you make the choice, it's not yet well enough informed. Now you've placed a big bet. And if you miss your market by an inch, you might as well have missed it by a mile. So that's where the tension and the sort of negotiation comes in most organizations is how fast is too fast? How fast is building that risk factor? And by the way, can we actually get to success factor by breaking this apart and calibrating our choices and understanding some of the sort of contingencies here where if we make this decision, it has ramifications for the next decision. And there's probably some
Well, and
project
it's
managers out
why, I
there
mean,
going, yeah,
yeah, like you're hitting on things that is how I coach teams on a day in and day out basis, which is you're making those small choices and you're not making the next choice yet because you don't know what you're going to find out from this one. And so you have a general destination in mind, but you're open to the opportunity of changing what the destination is as you're learning as you go.
Yeah, and maintenance of optionality is actually a valuable attribute, right? To be in a position and a stance as a team, as an organization, as an individual, to redirect when appropriate, to not be so locked in to a groove that you end up, wasting resources and energy or finding yourself in a high regret circumstance down the road. And, again, Kim is smirking. I'm going to let her
Yeah.
talk now.
Because um this is why I hate 18-month project plans. So where we were talking a couple of minutes ago, right? Is if you don't have built in points where you are making new decisions based off of new information, right? I, I have worked on projects where it's like, no, we're building this because we decided to build this 12 months ago. What if something changed in the environment, in what you learned as you were writing code or building the product or the world, like literally anything could change. And so if you only make your choice 12, 18, 24 months ago, that maybe that worked 15 years ago, but not even great then, if we're being honest.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as we said, or I said recently in a social media post, never underestimate the ability of humans to over and underestimate, right? And this approach also helps manage that because with the iterations, there are these check-ins. And to make this maybe feel a little more relatable for people and less esoteric, imagine that somebody with a big executive title says, go forth and do this. And you believe or suspect that it may not be entirely accurate. Iterating and being able to play back and provide some insights back to that person with a big title can help them understand, oh, we just sidestepped a significant investment of resources that would have been poorly deployed.
Mhm.
And, so, and this is probably a good time to transition now. Oh, go
Well, I
ahead,
think
Kim.
I'm going to use kind of a recent example from just my own experience building something, right? So I needed a CRM, a customer relationship management tool. And the first day that I started building it, which I did using vibe coding, I just needed a place to store contacts and maybe deals. And then as I started using it, like say 20 days after that, I needed to be able to see how much was in my pipeline versus how much I needed to be in my pipeline, right? So,
Yes.
like, even making those choices of what to build along the way, if I would have tried to build everything that I might possibly ever need in a CRM, I would just like go by HubSpot, honestly, right? So, but that has features that I don't need and I don't want to pay for honestly either. So making small choices actually helped me learn more what I needed instead of going for the sky.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this is very germane to the transition to how does this work for us as individuals, right? Because, as somebody who has grappled with insecurity and anxiety my whole life, um, I would often look at a thing, getting a job or moving to a new home or investing in a car, whatever it happens to be, or something at work. And my brain will manifest 1,000 different variables that would need to be clarified in order to optimize the choice.
Mhm.
And, whether that turns into rumination, overthinking, or paralysis, right? But my brain starts to build these monsters with 1,000 tentacles. And what I have found very helpful is to say, okay, let me envision what success looks like here. And, we've talked about it. The first step in any change initiative is imagining a better future
Uh-huh.
state. So let me just put a little definition out there on a whiteboard, on a piece of paper, like on at this time, these are the conditions. We'll have this new product, or I'll have a new ad campaign, or I'll have purchased a car that I feel good about,
Right.
whatever it happens to be. And then come back to, so based on where I am today, my go-to is, what are 5 things I can do now that feel like steps towards that?
Yeah.
They don't have to solve it, but they're just steps towards it. It could be little things like, understand I'm 6'6", right? But the first thing for me in buying a car is to go sit in cars and see if I
Mhm.
fit.
Mhm.
And it's like, I'm going to go sit in some cars, which, when people have come along car shopping with me, they're like, you walked into the showroom, you sat in 3 cars and you walked out. What's going on? And I'm like, well, I didn't fit in any of them.
Right. I
So I
hit the
don't need
button
any
and
more
left.
information. Right? But then it's like, okay, so what did I learn? Oh, I learned that my choice set is now smaller.
Mhm.
And so now what? And that to me is sort of the pragmatic thing of being able sometimes on a daily basis to say, okay, I had a to-do list. What did I accomplish? What did I learn? So now what's my next to-do list?
Yeah. What I love about, when you were talking about vision a few moments ago is an exercise that I've had client teams do is write a statement from the customer's perspective 24 months in the future.
Yes.
So the
Yeah.
vision from the customer, right?
Yeah.
And then when you're making choices on what to do next, does that align with the vision? And if not, you probably shouldn't do it right now. What we need to add into that to make sure it's the best decision is, are you refreshing that vision statement over time, right? Because 24 months is a long period of time. So, you know, 6 months in, what's the new statement from the customer kind of thing. But it lets you not just make the next best decision, it stops you from making unnecessary decisions also.
Yeah. 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 The filtering function on that, right? And this is, I think, in coupled with what's the next best choice is in a direction, right? If I had a whiteboard here, I'd be up and scribbling these little vectors all over it. And I've met me, so I know how my brain works. And without that defined target, without a destination, a sense of mission or purpose will be lacking. And there's 2 truths to that. One is having a direction helps us make choices because if you don't have a destination in mind, any road will
Like your
do,
GPS system, it can't give
and
you
you're just
directions
wandering.
unless you put your destination in there.
Correct. The other truth to it, though, is frequently it is okay to change destinations based on factors, right? In a GPS sense, traffic's
Rerouting,
bad.
rerouting,
The
rerouting.
the event is going to be, rained out or whatever
Yep.
else. In a business sense, it's like, hey, we've learned, we're 3 months into this initiative that the fragrance choice for this personal care product is no longer trending. Well, can we change fragrances? Yeah. Yeah, we can. There's all kinds of smells in the world, right? And so, those are 2 aspects. Understanding, like, yes, we need to have a sense of direction. And also, it's okay to shift where that target destination is as appropriate. And again, it's this balance. You don't want to be dogmatic towards a previously decided direction, but you also don't want to be so willy-nilly that you end up just basically spinning around and not making progress.
Well, and I think sometimes the next best decision is asking ourselves if we're still working on the
Committed.
right thing for the right
Yeah.
reason. Like, are we still committed to this?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm sure you've been part of it. I know I've been part of shutting things down, right? Creating more focus for our teams, coaching people on the power of saying no to one thing and yes to something else, to sort of evoke the spirit of Stephen Covey. But that ability to sort of reflect and either reaffirm, yes, we proceed, or redirect and say, not right now, let's go off and do this other thing. Years and years and years ago, because I'm old, I was working at Kohler, company that makes toilets and bathtubs and faucets and has a couple of very famous golf courses. And, we were working on a suite of products back in the 1990s that were fantastic. And at the time, we simply said, but the market's not there. So we shut it down. And lo and behold, 10 years later, a couple of those products showed up and were commercialized and were successful because market conditions had evolved to the point where they met a need that had sufficient demand to be commercially viable. But again, I always go back to the bravery of the decision makers at the time to not just say no, but just to say not right now. But we're going to keep this in the library and refer back to it because at some point there may be benefit here. And again, what was the next best choice in that instance? It was actually to mothball the initiative.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's making decisions is harder than it should be sometimes. And when you're a project team or a leader of an initiative, a product manager in probably that case, right? You've put a lot of kind of blood, sweat, and tears into building something, and it's not easy to say, let's not do this right now. It's not the right time. But it is the best choice. And um, I've had to coach teams on that as well. That same organization I was talking about earlier was, they wanted to develop that product a few years ago. The market wasn't ready then.
I worked in, consumer packaged goods for a number of years, and at one point we had a proliferation of innovation initiatives, and we didn't have capacity to move them all forward. And none of them on the surface of it were bad ideas. Um, but resources being what they are, we were going to benefit from greater focus, more intensity on a handful of things that offered the greatest potential. And I instituted a celebration of every shutdown. We would hold a wake for every project that we shut down. And I mean, literally take people out, give them some food and beverage, and we'd use a flip chart to document what we learned from it and catalog it. And, those became reference points. And with technology these days, you can actually search for some of that stuff. You can look at the insights, you can look at what the technical capabilities were. But it was an opportunity to appreciate and celebrate the shutting down of something. And back to this idea that we touched on earlier in this episode of the ability to fail and learn. All of a sudden, we kind of took the fail part out and just said, we're going to stop now and learn so that we can move forward more quickly in other areas or with more effectiveness in other areas. And the idea of celebrating rather than punishing failure is a topic that lots of people talk about and write about and try to celebrate. It is more difficult to put into practice in many cases than we'd like to acknowledge. There's huge power in it, though.
I think there's nuance in stop.
Mhm.
So there's stop, we're not going to bring the product to market at all. Or we have in software development side, we have a list of 100 features, but when we
Yes,
get to feature 82, we're no longer delivering any additional real value to the user. And so the product still is there, but it goes into a maintenance mode instead of building more features onto it that people don't need. And I think oftentimes there is well, we built this backlog of all these features, so we want all these features. Well, if the market's telling you no, right? So to your next best decision, that constant review of the value that your consumer is getting from the thing that you're building is
correct.
part of making the next best decision.
Correct. Correct. And I want to bring this back to, personal choices as well. It's not usually a requirement to solve every open question right now. And the ability to reflect and make a choice. I'm going to solve questions on project X in the backlog versus project Y. That's a choice. Making that choice could be one of your 5 things to do today. I'm going to choose which initiative to prioritize. Another could be, I'm going to talk to 3 users or 5 users and just get some feedback. Another, could be something as simple as, I'm going to list the things I believe in versus the ones where I'm a skeptic. That's an action unto itself. And, so when I talk about like, what's the next best set of actions or the next set of decisions, sometimes they're big ones, right? And sometimes they're pretty pedestrian, but they still move us in the direction, and frequently on a no regrets basis. If I do this, I will have no regrets. I will have learned something, and that learning will move me to the next step in the direction that I want to go.
Yeah. So I want to ask you how something resonates for you. So you kicked off this topic of next best decision. And to me, it's very close to just get started.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, what holds us back often is the decisions feel so huge that we don't start. And until we start, we can't do the learning we've talked about. We're not any closer to putting a product into market. And so this just getting started very much for me aligns with the next best decision because it makes it small, but momentum, right? You get kind of you get the flywheel going, so to speak.
Yeah, there are a bunch of sound bites around that. The greatest of journeys always start with the first step,
Yeah.
right? Um, and and I think from a pragmatic standpoint, if we had a bunch of program managers or project management professionals in this conversation, they'd be standing up and applauding right now
Mhm.
because breaking the big thing down into, listen, this, we're not, we have no intention to solve it all, so let's get into motion. There's, and this is how my brain works on it, there's the concept of inertia, right? An object at rest tends to stay at rest, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. Getting from one to the other takes some energy. And I want to just encourage people to get into action. It is easier to maintain a cadence of activities once you've started the activities. And in terms of making decisions, the same thing happens. When I make a choice today and I act on it, the next choice feels easier and acting on it feels less scary. And again, going back to this idea of trying to solve for the whole thing, we generally almost never need to solve for everything all at once.
I would
And
argue that we can't solve for the whole thing all at once because nobody knows what the future holds,
exactly,
right? Is
exactly.
quite literally one day at a time.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes it's hour to hour, right? It's, I've been in, for better or for worse, I've been in the depths of serious crisis management on a few occasions in my career. And, you know, I still remember sitting in a customer meeting in Chicago once and getting word that our factory had just put out a bunch of products that were bad. And and we didn't know why, we didn't know how many, but we knew that a no regrets thing was to set up a call center with an 800 number and start to communicate. So that was the first thing we did. And by the time we had that stood up, we had learned what the real issue was, right? And, it was just this cadence hour to hour of, so based on what we know, what's the next right choice? What's the next best decision? And we were able within less than 24 hours to have an appreciation of what had caused it, how bad it was going to be, how many people were going to be affected, how we were going to address it, what the costs were, all of that stuff. But it didn't start with knowing all of that. It started with people are going to be upset. We better be ready to receive their inbound complaints. Let's get a call center and a web page stood up. Boom. And then you go from there. And I think that to me, the other part of this is if you start getting into this kind of groove, you understand this rhythm, then the next big challenge doesn't feel so daunting. You start to build some self-confidence. You start to build some self-assuredness. Yeah, we're going to get through this.
And it's the same concept, right? In my agile coaching work, it's not the plan, it's the planning, right? So it's getting good at planning, at making small decisions, at breaking things down, builds uh, a thicker skin business wise to be able to deal with bad things when they do inevitably happen because they will.
Yeah. And, to me, I'm going to challenge you a little bit. Thicker skin almost implies like I can take your barbs and I'm indifferent to it. I think it builds resilience. I think it builds an ability to still perceive what's going on, but be comfortable responding to it,
Well, you're
knowing,
up for the challenge, right?
yeah,
So
exactly,
you're
exactly.
prepared for the challenge no matter what it is because you've had practice in so many different ways.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Probably a good place for us to draw a line under this. Thanks for diving into this topic, by the way. I hope it's helpful for the people who listen into the podcast. Any last thoughts as we're thinking about this or encouragement for folks out there?
I would just say to my other agilists who might be listening, if you think about the term of last responsible moment, this concept's very similar to that and how you apply it with your teams.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Kim, as always. Thank you, listeners, as always. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. We are the Faultline crew, and we'll be back soon with more interesting conversation and hopefully insights that you can apply in your real world circumstances. For Kim and myself, Gary, thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you again soon.